Hello, everybody. My research topic was: Did America appropriately react to September 11th, 2001? And we'll get to the answer of that. The points to consider is a brief history behind 9/11, the new legislations passed as a result of 9/11, the expansion of law enforcement agencies, the increase in economic spending. First, we'll define terrorism. Terrorism is the systematic use of violence to create a general climate of fear in a population and then achieve political objectives. Um, and then I quoted from the American Psychologist, which is an academic journal, that one of the main goals of terrorism is to cause social, political, psychological, and economic consequences for a country. So some events leading up to 9/11, and these are the main events, is the conception of Al Qaeda in 1988, which happened as a result of the Soviet Afghanistan invasion. Osama bin Laden formed Al Qaeda, and without the formation of Al Qaeda, 9/11 wouldn't have happened because it was all under the command of Al Qaeda. And then the next main event to consider is the 1993 World Trade Center truck bomb, in which a truck bomb went to it was like a underground floor of the World Trade Center. It detonated with the intent to knock the tower over into the other tower, but it failed. Just some people died and got injured. And we know September 11th, 2001 as that big day, but also 1993, the World Trade Center truck bombing. That's also a very big day because that begins America's road into being cautious and expanding homeland security and doing things in the name of national. So immediately after 9/11, George W. Bush came out to the press and then gave these quotes. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. We'll get into why that is false at the end. Um, but all nations, if they want to fight terror, must do something. Over time, it's going to be important for nations to know that they will be held accountable for inactivity. You're either with us or against us in the fight against terror. And pretty much what this is doing is it's setting a stage of black and white for all world leaders. So when the American guy at the UN proposes something where he wants some countries to cooperate with the CIA in counterterrorism, and that country doesn't want to allocate funds towards counterterrorism because that country doesn't have a problem with terrorism, it's setting that country that doesn't want to cooperate as being with a terrorist. That's a horrible foreign policy. And then another thing to consider is Osama bin Laden's speech on November 2004. The most important thing I think that we should consider is when he said we bled Russia for 10 years until it went bankrupt and was forced to withdraw in defeat. And as we know it, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1993, not long after that invasion ended. So we are continuing this policy and bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. Now, I'm not an economic analyst, but I believe that the first step to making a country bankrupt is to make them spend excessive amounts of money on things they don't want to spend. And then the next point to consider is the expansion of law enforcement. So there was a very big increase in homeland security programs. Counterterrorism became America's number one priority. So numbers wise, there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in America, roughly. 50% of them employ less than 10 police officers. 40% of them employ less than 40 police officers. And then the other 10% are those big federal agencies with hundreds to thousands of employees. So pretty much what happened was all of these law enforcement agencies, even on the lower end, the local level, state and local level, county, they had to begin participating in homeland security programs, which obviously will result in a lot of spending, but also it creates a heightened security pretty much permanently. So there's always a sense of distrust between communities and police officers when you get stopped for a traffic stop and then things are coming down to do you have a gun, do you have a bomb. It was never like that before 9/11. So that's one thing that I consider to be a social or political consequence. And then legislations. The Patriot Act was passed shortly after 9/11. And what the Patriot Act is It's an acronym for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. What that is a very fancy acronym for an act that strips Americans of their rights, of their First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights, because essentially the FBI could search telephones, email, and financial records without the need for a court order. This overreach in otherwise existing amendments, it continued with things like the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, Money Laundering Act, Bank Secrecy Act, Fair Credit Reporting Act. All of these passed as a result of 9/11, and all they do is increase the government's capabilities in getting information about their citizens. And then we come to the next slide, economic spending. This is the biggest thing, as everything leads up to this, the budget of America. So the main things to focus on here are total war operations and war-related spending through 2016, 3,689 billion, and I did the math on this. That means 3.68 trillion. And then total spending and future obligations through 2053, that's 4.79 trillion. So the end result of this economic spending on homeland security, for prevention and response to terrorism, engagement in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it all totals to 4.7 trillion, but we're not done yet. These are war reparations in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and cumulatively that ends up in $1.7 trillion and $65 billion, and what that comes to is a grand total of roughly $6 trillion spent on the war of terror as a whole. While we could argue that that is what America is supposed to do, every single dollar spent on preventing terrorism, we always have to keep in mind that every dollar spent on the war on terror is another dollar withdrawn from services like infrastructure, education, getting jobs for Americans, welfare for Americans, other programs that could benefit Americans. Everything is being spent on bombs and jets and guns and invasions rather than benefiting American citizens. So we finally come back to the end. What does it all mean for America, all of the spending? Well, let's go ahead and see. The main goals of terrorism are social, political, psychological, and economic consequences. Without a doubt in my mind, pretty much every single one of these points have been inflicted upon us. We've changed as a society. Our politics are different. Everything is different in the post 9/11 world of politics. It's all focused around national security. Psychologically, it's changed. Americans vote for the candidate which focuses on national security the most. And I just showed you those two charts. There is a lot of economic consequences that's resulted because of 9/11. America is pretty much built on the hatred of big government. There was a Revolutionary War against Britain because Britain would tax Americans. They would get all of their financial records, and Americans didn't want that. They don't like big government because it results in oppression. And here we see, after 9/11, pretty much all of that has just gone under the table, and national security is the new big focus. The First, Second, and Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights are all being challenged, while they weren't before 9/11. So in my humble opinion, America did not appropriately react to 9/11. They've pretty much handed over every single goal that Al-Qaeda wished to achieve from the September 11th, 2001 attack. They've achieved all of these social, political, psychological, and economic consequences that I just listed. And then as for how to fix this problem, I'm a sophomore. That paper is for a different class at a different final, probably after earning a PhD in some kind of other field than computer science. So that's pretty much all the input I have.